Global leaders are holding talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of BRICS summit, which is being hosted in Russia's southwestern city of Kazan. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Chinese President Xi Jinping, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, among other global leaders, are in Kazan to participate in the summit. As many as 22 heads of state and 6 heads of international organizations are expected to attend the event. The Prime Minister of India and President Putin held bilateral talks after the duo greeted and hugged each other, referring to the Russia-Ukraine war. The Prime Minister of India reiterated his message of ceasefire. He said that India believes in peaceful resolutions and solutions to the conflicts. This is Prime Minister Modi's second visit to Russia in the last 3 months.
Уважаемый господин премьер-министр, переговоры с вами. एक्सेलेंसी, रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय पर हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे हैं। जैसा मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारा मानना है कि समस्याओं का समाधान शांतिपूर्ण तरीके से ही होना चाहिए। शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली का हम पूरी तरह समर्थन करते हैं।
The bonhomie between India and Russia was on display during the crucial meeting. The duo shared a light moment when President Putin joked that he and Prime Minister Modi can understand each other without any translation.
У нас такие отношения, что я считал, что вы и так все понимаете.
हमारे इतने रिश्ते हैं कि मुझे ऐसा लगा कि आपको कोई अनुवाद नहीं चाहिए। माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, प्रिय दोस्तों।
And as a special honor, Russian fighter jets escorted the incoming planes of Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping before they landed in Kazan for the summit. Prime Minister Modi's 2-day visit to Kazan is being watched closely. It comes a day after India announced that it has reached an agreement with China on non-hostile patrolling along the line of actual control. The developments have raised the possibility of a bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping. As Russia hosts the 16th edition of the BRICS summit, it wants to showcase the rising clout of the non-Western world. For President Putin, the 3-day meeting also offers a powerful way to demonstrate the failure of US-led efforts to isolate Russia of its action in Ukraine. Kremlin has touted the summit as the largest foreign policy event ever held by Russia, with 36 countries attending and more than 20 of them represented by heads of state.
Shared goals of development and take each other's interests.
Andrew K.P. Long is the chairman and CEO. Andrew Long International Consultants and Investments Limited is now joining us live on the broadcast. Mr. Long, thank you very much for making time for us and welcome. Some critics see this summit in Russia as a turning point for both India and China. If both leaders do agree to hold a bilateral or any form of talk, it will be considered as a big breakthrough. What will be the impact if both leaders do indeed agree to sit and talk?
Well, let's first be clear on one point. The patrolling protocol agreement doesn't mean that the border disputes between India and China are thereby resolved, nor does it mean that the line of actual control would henceforth be clearly defined. I think these problems are going to remain for a very long time. But what it does mean is that both leaders are determined to scale down, to de-escalate the hostile relationship between the two nations. And at a time when the Global South is rising, of which the BRICS summit is a very important platform. Now, the rise of the Global South is a reflection of a changing world order. Not that the American leadership would thereby be sidelined or abandoned. America still leads in many different ways, in different areas and arenas, and not least, of course, the still dominance of the US dollar. But then the United States is finding it less and less able to call the shots at all times. And of course, that the nations in the Global South are becoming more economically viable. and they're able to safeguard their sovereignty. And that's the idea that the existing world order needs to be modified, are now rallying these countries together. Not that they are going to form a hard, solid bloc, because the idea of blocks doesn't work anymore. It is a multipolar, a multi-dimensional and interdependent world.
Mr.
But it does
Long,
mean
before you
that there are
Mr.
themes that the developing nations can rally together. Yeah.
Mr. Long, before you continue, let me just go back to my point, because I don't think I've been answered on that. I did ask you if both leaders decide to meet and decide to talk, what will be the impact of that in the region?
Well, I think it's well expected, because you talk about the region in Asia, not least Southeast Asia. They don't want the two largest economies in Southeast Asia at loggerheads. And then, of course, the hope is still very strong amongst the neighbors of both India and China, that the two countries can find a way to get along with one another. So I don't think that this is a really something like a total surprise to the neighbors in Southeast Asia. And I think that what binds all these nations together, as I was trying to point out, is the rise of the global South in the context of a changing world order, so far dominated by the United States, with all its faults and all its wrongdoings and creating havoc in different areas. So I think that is very important as a major rallying point amongst all the countries in the global South.
Mr. Long, just to take this conversation forward, why does this summit that has 36 world leaders in attendance matter to Vladimir Putin?
Well, I don't think that it is a salute to Putin that they all coming together. I don't think that all the countries in the global South support the Russians' military actions in Ukraine, but they don't want it. They are likewise do not support the sanctions on Russia, as recently exemplified in the United Nations resolutions. But I think that the global South are more than aware that the world doesn't translate into solid blocks. The idea of blocks don't work anymore. It is the whole world is multi-connected, interdependent, much more than before. I think what the global South is trying to do is to rally themselves together in common areas of concern like trade or climate change or security and security, so that they can form fruitful partnership for one another, not to form a solid bloc against the West.
All right. I've been talking to Mr. Andrew K.P. Long. He's the chairman and CEO of Andrew Long International Consultants and Investments Limited. Mr. Long, thank you for your time and for talking to us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's now talk to our assistant editor for Foreign Affairs, Sidhan Sibol, who is joining us live from Kazan. Sidhan Sibol, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi did have a bilateral meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Are there any other bilateral meetings that the Prime Minister of India is expected to have or has had?
Well, Eric, essentially here the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Iranian President are meeting. And remember, this is the first meeting of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi with the new Iranian President. Last year on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, the Indian Prime Minister had met the then Iranian President, President Riasi. We know he died earlier this year in a plane crash. But essentially, India-Iran relationship are a pretty strong relationship. Chabar is one of the key pillars of the relationship. Of course, the meeting will be closely watched in West Asia, given the dynamics in West Asia. We know the crisis in West Asia, the rockets being fired, and the conflict between the Hamas, Hezbollah and Israel now spreading in the wider region. So we will be waiting for readouts by both the Iranian and the Indian side. But talking about the meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Russian President Vladimir Putin, the second bilateral meeting between the two leaders, and essentially the Indian Prime Minister talked about the strength of the relationship, the BRICS grouping, how the BRICS grouping is getting a global recognition. This is the 16th BRICS summit, and India was a founding member of the BRICS grouping way back in 2009. The first summit took place here in Russia's Yekaterinburg. But all in all, with new membership and new members lining up to be part of this grouping, we will see this grouping getting more global attention. But talking about the bilateral, going back to the big focus, we also saw the Indian Prime Minister talking about the Ukraine conflict. He pointing out that through peaceful way that there can be a resolution to the ongoing war that is underway. India, of course, has played an important role. The Indian Prime Minister was on a bilateral visit to Moscow, then he traveled to Kyiv. So a lot of conversation the Indians are doing with the Russians and the Ukrainians. Of course, India has said that while it would not like to mediate, it can transfer messages from the two capitals, and that can help in easing out the tension. So two big bilaterals, one with Iran, another with Russia. Then, of course, the last engagement of the day will be the BRICS informal dinner that will happen here in Kazan, where I am standing, and we could see informal conversation between leaders. Of course, the big question remains whether there will be a bilateral meeting between the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President, given the conversation around the thaw after the petroleum agreement being agreed on. So no word on if the bilateral will happen, but we could see some kind of conversation happening between the two leaders, something we saw last year at the BRICS summit in South Africa.
All right, that is our assistant editor for Foreign Affairs, Sidhant Sibol, live in Kazan. Sidhant, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.